Hello, welcome to Essential Crochet. My name is Sig, and you, of course, are always welcomed here. Today, we are going to be exploring the Annie's Moroccan Tile Kit Club. Today is Kit 7 for me here, and I will be exploring this with you. So if you've already subscribed, I just like to give you a nice warm thank you for subscribing to my channel. If you haven't already subscribed, I invite you to subscribe, like, hit the notification bar. This helps me out a lot, and this will keep you on top of future kits and tutorials that I post here. So because I'm not really huge on big introductions, or at least not when I think they're not very warranted, let's just go ahead and get started. Okay, everyone, today is Kit 7. Only a couple of more kits left to go. We're going to be rounding this thing up and finishing it out. And I'm excited because it's coming together. However, I do have a couple of things that I need to discuss with you in terms of this particular kit, particularly now that we're finishing up Kit 7. And so there's one thing I've been holding off on talking to you about. And then there's another thing with regards to the assembly of this piece that I found kind of strange and a little different than anything I've ever worked on. So we'll talk about it towards the end of the video. So again, this is the Holiday Spice Afghan kit number 7 from Annie's Moroccan Tile Afghan series. If you don't really know, or this is the first time you've seen this video, Annie's does this Afghan in several different colorways, and I happen to like the Holiday Spice the best. That was the best for my needs, but they come in fabulous different colorways as well, so it's worth checking out because I've actually really been enjoying this particular kit, and I'm excited to see how it finishes up. So quickly, as I've discussed before, the skill level is for an advanced beginner or ambitious beginner, or at least this is what they tell us, but I'm here to tell you right now, this really is an intermediate kit. However, if you are a beginner, an advanced beginner, or an ambitious beginner, or just a newbie, it's still worth giving it a try because Annie's does offer video tutorials. And while I haven't followed any of those, I understand they're quite good. Now, with this month's kit, they gave me 3 skeins of the cream and 1 skein of rhubarb and 1 skein of the cocoa. So I'll discuss yarn with you in just a moment as we continue as usual. And of course, this is probably never going to change, but I'll say it again. The size hook that I'm using is a size I or a 5.5 millimeter, also a US size 9 if that works best for you. They tell us that in this kit 7, I will be using remnants of the sienna, saffron, cayenne, and garden pink from my previous kits. And again, I'll go over all the yarn and how much I actually have left from previous kits to work with on this kit in just a moment as a quick refresher. And then also a tapestry needle is what we'll need. And that's, of course, just for weaving in ends. So now this is the yarn that they gave me in the kit today. So the 3 creams, the rhubarb, and then the cocoa. Now, as far as the cream is concerned, I really did need more cream because this is all that I have left. And so they've given me 3 more skeins. I think it'll be enough between the 4 blocks and what I have here in yarn. I'm pretty sure we're going to make it, but as usual, we'll see what's left over at towards the end of this video. Next, this is what they gave me, and this is what I already have of the rhubarb. So I'm going to guess that what I have here for the rhubarb is pretty much mostly what I'm going to use. I mean, seriously. So we'll see again at the end of the video. We'll see how much rhubarb we have left over. But I bet I'm going to have pretty much these 2 skeins. But further on in the next couple of kits, I will definitely be using a lot of the rhubarb. So we'll just set what's left over aside and see what happens. Again, they gave me a 50-gram skein of the cocoa. I already had a skein of cocoa and this right here, this little bit left. And from what I can tell from just looking at the squares offhand, I bet you again that most of the cocoa that I need, I will have enough with this little cake of cocoa. I don't I honestly don't see us using too much more than maybe one more skein of cocoa with regards to finishing the Afghan itself. I'm not entirely sure, but again, we'll hang on to everything because I could be wrong. You know, I do miscalculate my yarn amounts more often than I care to admit. Now, the saffron. They didn't give us any saffron, but this is the saffron I have left. And just again, looking at the squares we will be using today, I don't see a lot of saffron use happening. I don't know how much more saffron, except for the little bit of saffron we'll be using in these last couple of blocks, that I will be using again in this Afghan. So we'll see. I mean, I might end up with a whole skein of saffron, or at least a goodly amount for the stash, just to set aside and use on another project. I don't think that would make me feel sorry. I actually really like this saffron color. As far as the garden pink is concerned, they did not give me any more of the garden pink. This is what I have left, and I think it should be enough. I'm hoping it's enough because I'm looking at the piece right now and I'm wondering if I'm going to be cutting it pretty close. I think I will be cutting it close, but yeah, we'll be cutting it close. We'll see what happens. Next is the cayenne pepper. This is going to be another one we're going to be cutting pretty close. It's a good thing I'm fairly conservative with my yarn because I think we're going to have some stuff to talk about at the end of this kit, maybe above and beyond what I already know we need to talk about. And then last, the sienna. Now, I'm sure that we're going to have enough sienna left, but I'm also pretty sure that I will use up all of what's in this little bundle right here, and I certainly feel like I'm going to tap into this new 50-gram skein. Now, they haven't given me any more of the sienna, and I don't suspect that they will because I believe this is the last time I will be using sienna in this project. Now, after quickly looking through the instructions for square one, it's really pretty straightforward. Like, these motifs are things that we have already done up until this point for this Afghan in terms of stitches used. They just happen to be compiled in a slightly different way for this square. And as you can see, we're going to be using the garden row. Let me try that again. As you can see, we're going to be using the garden pink and the cayenne, and then also the saffron and then the rhubarb for this piece. And then here for square 7, you can see we're going to be using the sienna. And again, these are stitches that we're already should be pretty familiar with. And then, of course, we've got the cocoa and the garden pink again, and then more of the cayenne. And then we're going to be getting into the assembly process. And that I'll talk a little more about later because it really is kind of different than anything I've done before. And as you can see, we just have the 4 squares this time, the 4 tiles, 2 separate patterns. Now with this kit, once I've finished these 4 squares, I will actually assemble this part of the Afghan. You can see where my hook is going. So basically, I'm going to assemble all the blocks. I'm going to put them all together, and then I'm going to also connect them to this middle piece that is already completed. So that's going to be kind of fun because at the end of this video today, we're going to see probably, what looks like maybe 3, not quite 3/4, maybe 2/3 of the Afghan will be completed. So yarn that I used and yarn that was left over. So if you remember, they gave me 3 skeins of cream, and I'd already had a little bit of cream left. And as one would expect, as I totally expected, I went through the majority of the cream. In fact, I went through just over 2 full skeins of cream. And this is what I have left. And of course, there's still going to be a lot of cream left to put into this Afghan. And so this is definitely going to be used. I'd be surprised if there's very much cream left over at the end of this project. For this project, they also gave me 1 skein of rhubarb, but I already had a skein and a cake, or, some leftover rhubarb from another project, and really, quite frankly, didn't use that much of it. In fact, I used maybe half of what I originally had in this cake, in this rewound bit of rhubarb from another project. And so I still have 2 full skeins plus what was left over, which is this little bit. However, there is a lot of rhubarb and there is a lot of paprika in the next couple of kits that we'll be going through. So definitely we'll be putting these aside because I am sure, like the cream, I'm going to use up most of this rhubarb colorway. Now the cocoa. They did give me a full skein of cocoa for this time around, but I only just barely cracked into what I had left over from the last skein that I started. So now I have 2 skeins and still a small rewound cake of the cocoa yarn. And as I look at the pattern or the image of the piece, I honestly don't see where we will use cocoa again. We might, I don't know. I haven't seen the full pattern, so I'm not entirely sure. Maybe it's worked somewhere into with the rhubarb. I don't know. But it's hard for me to tell just looking at the image I have to work with. In fact, the colors, they look like what I'll be using is the cream, the paprika, the rhubarb, and maybe the basil and the pine. I mean, those are the colorways I think I'll be using going forward. So I don't know just yet if this is just a bunch of yarn left over for me to do something else with, or if I will actually implement this. Now, the same goes for sienna, right? So I didn't get any more sienna. This is what was left over from the last bit of yarn that I used. I had a skein plus a rewound cake, and I didn't use very much. So all I used was what was on the cake, and so I have very little bit of that left. And so this is just basically extra yarn, unless there's some place on this pattern I am just not seeing where this is going to be used again. So I strongly suspect, and rightly so, that I will not be getting any more sienna. Same with the saffron as with the sienna. I already had 1 full skein. I had another rewound cake from leftover saffron yarn that I used previously. And there again, didn't really use that much saffron. So is this going to be what's left over? Maybe. We'll have to wait and see, because again, I do not see any more saffron being used on the remainder of this Afghan. Now let's talk about the Cayenne and the Garden Pink. These were the yarns I was worried about having to play yarn chicken with, because the squares used both of these colorways, so on all 4 squares, but it really turned out that the color usage of either one of these colors was so minimal. I still have, relatively speaking, plenty of yarn left. And again, as with the cocoa and the saffron and the sienna, it does not seem I will be using these colorways again on this Afghan. And so I just end up putting all my yarn to the side, and then we'll see what happens. So, I mean, next kit, I'm suspecting I'm just going to get more cream, maybe some basil, and maybe some pine cone colorways. And I suspect that'll probably be about it. I'm not entirely sure how much more, because this kit has 10 parts to it. I'm at 7, so that means I have 3 more parts. And so yeah, I suspect they're going to split up the 3 sections of the border, which is basically 3 different colorways here. I'll show you what I'm talking about. So you can see this is a section 1 border, section 2, and then section 3 with the tassel. So yeah, I suspect, and we'll see if I'm wrong or not, but I suspect that kit 8 is going to include this cream and what appears to me as the basil and the pine cone colors part of the border. And then the next part of the border is the paprika, and it looks like it's probably just going to be straight paprika. And then, of course, the third part of the border, which appears to me to be the rhubarb and also cream. So we'll see how that goes. So here I go. Here is the first square that I completed, square 7. And that worked out pretty quickly and pretty easily, as I suspected. And so now here you can see that this is what my square 6 looks like. And just with all the other blocks and tiles on this piece, it's the inside of the square that has a slightly different design from one to the other, and it's the border that is exactly the same on each square except for the colorway used. So now this brings me to the first thing I wanted to discuss with you. Out of the 2 things that I was most concerned about, and well, this first thing really isn't a concern, but it's something I need to bring up just in case some of you were astute enough to notice. And it may or may not be a little thing, or you may simply have noticed something was off and you couldn't quite put your finger on it, and I'll tell you what that was. So when I worked my first tile, I worked back bar, and then I realized I had misread the instructions for the design. And of course, there were parts of the instruction that required you to work back bar, which gives you this chain or braided look in your motif. And then there were plenty of other aspects of this pattern in all the squares and all the tiles that require you to work the back loop. Now, the back loop, and I'll move this over here, loop gives you more of a regular kind of row to row or round to round crochet look. So I think you can see the difference. So I have, this is what the pattern was supposed to look like, and this is what I made my pattern to look like. Now you can see that this is kind of this braided look because I worked back bar in the border aspects of my design elements on each square. And the reason I did that was, well, with the first square, it was actually a mistake. I misread the instructions. However, for me, that was a happy accident because in all honesty, I like this look so much better. It just appeals to my sense of aesthetics. Not that there was anything wrong with this particular way of doing it. In fact, this is the way that it would traditionally be done. So of course, nothing wrong with that. I mean, clearly I thought the pattern was beautiful just the way it was. I just happened to not read my instructions as well as I should have on the first square, and this is what I ended up with. Now, I redid a block in the very beginnings of all of this to match exactly what the instructions were telling me to do. And quite frankly, I just decided that for me, this is what I liked better in terms of my aesthetics. Now, I didn't say anything early on because, quite frankly, I didn't think most people were going to notice the difference through the video. Now, if you looked at the pattern and you looked at the 2 pieces in real life, I'm pretty sure everyone would clearly see the difference, but on video, it's a little trickier. But I decided not to mention it because I didn't really know how it was going to affect the size of the square, to be quite honest with you. I didn't know if in the end it was going to be problematic when piecing it together and trying to make everything fit. Because the piecing together on this turns out to be, I don't know if it's trickier than normally it would be, but it certainly was way different than I anticipated it to be. Way different than I even envisioned it to be. And I wasn't sure how well it was going to work out because I'd never done it before. And that takes us right into the second issue I wanted to bring up. Now, the second issue is where they actually have you piece together each block or each square, and you're to make this square with an open middle kind of sash or strip, if you will. And so I thought that was really strange because I'd never pieced together an Afghan like this before, where you piece together the complete border first and then you make it fit with the middle piece that's been done previously. So now this is what it looks like, of course, with the previously finished middle part of the Afghan sitting inside the border that has been pieced together. And at this point, this is where you need to line up the aspects and seams of the center part with the border and seams and aspects of the second part before you start crocheting these pieces together. So I wasn't really sure how this was going to turn out, especially since I changed the stitch element on part of each of the squares. And so in terms of sizing and making everything line up and fit, I was worried that this was going to be a little trickier than I had hoped. So with the help of the instructions, I lined up my seams, I figured out where everything needed to be placed, and I just simply held the pieces together using my stitch markers at those pivotal locations. And again, this is just to give you an idea as to which seams I lined up and pretty much where I placed my stitch markers so that I could keep all sides and stitches kind of relatively even and with give or take the appropriate count of stitching. And in the end, everything worked out fine, lining everything up the way I was instructed to do so. And from the pamphlet, everything worked out beautifully. The count was good. I had a couple of places where I had to adjust for a stitch or two, but that wasn't a big deal. And the sizing of my squares were near perfect in terms of alignment and working out to fit just nicely within the borders. So now I think that's going to do it for kit number 7, and I look forward to seeing you for kit number 8. This has been pretty amazing. It's been pretty fun. And until we meet again, you just take care of yourselves and have a most wonderful weekend. Bye-bye now.